Well, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon and hello. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for joining us online today for our Curating Activism panel. And I'm Dr. Caroline Dunham-Schroeder, and I'm the co-founder of Douglass Week and the president of the Globe Lane Initiative, who has organized this event for you today. And as most of you know, we celebrate October, and we celebrate Black History Month in Ireland in October, and we have already hosted two in-person events in Cork in Ireland this month, which is very exciting because we got a chance to highlight our Cork abolitionist trail and our partnership with the Imperial Hotel in Cork. You should check that out if you are ever in Cork. And for this third event today, we are delighted to welcome such a fantastic lineup here, brilliant speakers, as well as so many people in the audience today. So that's really great. We're delighted to have you. And our panel of speakers will discuss the role of museums, galleries, curators, and artists in promoting social justice and equity, as well as the ideas and challenges surrounding the exhibitions of Frederick Douglass and other changemakers in the 21st century. And so much more, of course. And as always, if you've joined us for other Douglass Week or Globe Lane Initiative events, I'm here not alone, but I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, friend, and Douglass Week co-founder, Kristen Leary. Hi, Kristen.
Hello, Caroline. Hello, everyone. And thanks to everyone joining us today for this very important discussion. We're so grateful to our participants today for making the time for this rescheduled Douglass Week 2023 event. Thanks to all of you for being so flexible and available. And thanks to those of you joining us in the audience as well. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions later on. And on that note, before we begin, we have a few housekeeping notes. First, the event will last approximately 1 hour. Please submit any questions through the Zoom chat, and Caroline and I will monitor the chat and pass your thoughts and questions on to the speakers as we go.
Yeah, and as I said, there will be a Q&A part of this event, so we'll ask you to raise your virtual hand later and then unmute yourself and ask questions you might have for our speakers. And please keep your microphones muted until then, but we do love to see your faces, so feel free to turn on your camera if you want. And if you do have a burning question, pop them in the chat here on Zoom, and Kristen and I will monitor it, as Kristen just said. And we also ask everyone to be please respectful to our panelists and other audience members. Inappropriate conduct will not be tolerated because we practice gratitude and kindness, and we invite you to do the same. And for your information, I mentioned this at the beginning, but we are recording this event, and it will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days.
Yes, and speaking of YouTube, on our YouTube channel and on our social media, you can also find many more of the events we have hosted in the past, starting with our first Douglass Week event series in 2021. And if you want to know more about what we do at the Globe Lane Initiative and Douglass Week, please visit our website, which is www.douglassweek.org. We'd also like to extend an invitation to everyone to Douglass Week 2024 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which will take place on the 14th to 20th of April in 2024, with both in-person and online events scheduled in Belfast and in other cities around the world, including our former Douglass Week host cities of Cork, Ireland, Rochester, New York, and Washington, D.C. And you can find much more information about those events and everything related to Douglass Week 2024 on our website as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. That's going to be really exciting. So we hope that you guys join us for that in April. And we hope that you enjoyed this exciting panel as well. And I will now hand over to Dr. Michael Waldron. Dr. Waldron is a curator based in Cork, Ireland, with an interdisciplinary background in literary criticism and art history. He's presently curator of collections and special projects at Crawford Art Gallery in Cork, an Irish National Cultural Institution. And he has previously lectured at University College Cork and holds a PhD in English literature. He has published on Irish artists such as John Hogan, Samuel Ford, Patrick Hennessy, John Noel Smith, Joseph Heffernan, John Rainey, Una Waters, Sylvia Cook-Collins, and writer Elizabeth Bone. And so thank you one more time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you, Mike, for chairing this event. Enjoy. And Mike, I hand over to you now.
Thank you, Caroline and Kristen, for that really wonderful welcome, and welcome to you all. And thanks for joining us this evening or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So as Caroline mentioned, October is Black History Month in Ireland. And this week in 1845, Frederick Douglass gave a speech entitled American Prejudice Against Colour, here in Cork at the Imperial Hotel. And it's perhaps timely, even though this panel has been postponed since Douglass Week in July, that Curating Activism occurs now. As Caroline mentioned, I'm curator of collections and special projects at Crawford Art Gallery. And now that's just as a sort of a full disclosure, it is a state-funded national cultural institution dedicated to the visual arts, and my role in particular is focusing on the development of the collection, but also the diversification of it. It is possibly, understandably, as an old collection, quite Caucasian and quite rooted in certain class, and so our role here is to work on that into the future, to reflect our own communities and society more broadly. So our panel today comprises of 4 brilliant speakers. You are brilliant, and they are based here in Ireland, but also in the United States, and I'll introduce them shortly. The format of the event will be 3 sections. So firstly, we'll hear from the speakers themselves. Then I'll put a few questions to them. And then I'll open up questions to the floor and to the audience. So you know all about that from Caroline and Kristen's overview. Each section will last about 15 to 20 minutes. So we will keep neat within the hour runtime. So before I introduce our speakers, let's talk briefly about curating activism, because it's an interesting combination of words, curating, activism. They might not sit very well together if we think about that. So to curate is to care for, but also using specialist knowledge is to select, organize, and present objects and information, sometimes within a public or private institution like a museum, gallery, or library. Activism, on the other hand, is the act of campaigning for social, political, even legal change. So it's by its nature positional. It takes a position, and oftentimes museums are thought to be not taking a position, but of course we know that's not always the case. And so do these sit comfortably together? How might curation support the presentation of activism without bias? What is the role of the institution and the individual in this? And what should we be looking out for? So let's find out. So I'll now introduce our guest panelists separately, and I'll invite each of them to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to the questions section. So I said I would surprise them in the running order. So first up, we have Lily Wong, who is the Associate Curator and Manager of History Exhibits at the New York Historical Society, a museum and library in New York City. She is the co-curator of Acts of Faith, Religion and the American West, and Our Composite Nation, Frederick Douglass's America, an ongoing exhibition exploring Douglass's vision of freedom, citizenship, and equal rights, and his hopeful plea for America to live up to its founding ideals in the years after the end of slavery. So I'll hand you over to Lily just for a few minutes, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, I am a curator at the New York Historical Society. Oops, that's not what, there you go. Okay, technology. So this is a view of the exhibition that we have called Our Composite Nation, Frederick Douglass's America. And it focuses on one particular speech that Frederick Douglass gave across the United States beginning in 1869. So quick background on American history: Civil War breaks out in 1861, ends in 65. Slavery is abolished, and we enter into a period known as Reconstruction. Formerly enslaved people are freed, and they become citizens of the United States thanks to a constitutional amendment. While Douglass is out giving this speech, the 15th Amendment will pass, granting Black men in America the right to vote. So this is a time of great change for the United States, and also of a lot of possibilities. And this speech really caught our eye because it's remarkable in so many different ways, least of which is how hopeful it is and how much Douglass kind of extends his vision of what the United States can be beyond just what's happening to African American at the time, in particularly making a plea for Chinese immigrants. And that's a story we tell in this exhibit as well, alongside his pleas for, quote, absolute equality, religious liberty, and to really push the United States to live up to the ideals that it had laid out in its Constitution. And I'm happy to talk more about this as we go. I also just wanted to share another installation view of a nice statue of Douglass that we included within the exhibition. I think another noteworthy thing, a lot of times we talk about Douglass as an abolitionist, but of course he lives into the 1890s, and he does a lot of interesting things that are worth exploring in the latter parts of his career. And then my last thing before I'll hand it back to Michael is just to mention that alongside the exhibition, we developed an educational curriculum that you can access thanks to the World Wide Web. It's at nyhistory.org/ourcompositenation. And it follows along with the exhibition, exploring these themes, as I mentioned, you know, equality, immigration, religious liberty, citizenship, all of these, American democracy, all of these kind of touchstones that are really have proven to be really helpful for students and for teachers as they think about US history, as they think about Frederick Douglass. So I will hand it back to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Lily. Super. So I'll move on to our next panelist. Teresa Williams is a Golden ID student at the University of Maryland, College Park. She currently curates a website focusing on Frederick Douglass Square as part of a project that started in her archival research methods class. She's passionate about meaningful collaborations for this project, and with the help of a mini grant, her vision is to make the website more interactive, possibly using AR/VR technology. In February, she screened the website during Douglass Day, and in March, during Maryland Day, she shared the site's QR code with adults, while children played marbles at the feet of a monument to Douglass himself. So I'll hand you over to Teresa.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kristen and Caroline. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. Golden ID student, you know, if you need a little explanation, basically means that I'm pretty old. I'm not usual university undergraduate age, but I am very fortunate to have access to the resources at the university. And part of that access has fueled the fire to create this resource for anybody who would like to access it and to cross-pollinate perhaps departments at the University of Maryland to bring even more wealth of access to people inside and outside the university. So I would like to just share a video. There's no sound to this video, but I would like to share it. It gives you a little bit of background, shows some images, and it's a real simple way to share my journey so far. Ending here. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see that, Teresa. You just have to hit play and then we're
Yep.
good to go.
I will hit play when it is available. There we go. So I am planning to put some voice in there to make it a little more dynamic, but that's basically you know, the story of the website.
Super. Thank you so much, Teresa. I loved how that was mapped, and how ideas follow on from questions and create more questions. So just going to keep on going, introducing panelists, and then we'll get to the juicy bits. So our next panelist is Dr. Fernando Sanchez Migallon Cano, and he's a learning and engagement curator at the Douglas Hyde Gallery in Dublin, where he oversees the development and delivery of a programme that is integral to the activities of the gallery, aiming to expand and enhance its exhibition programme by offering multiple engagement points. Fernando completed his PhD titled The Power of Display, Exhibition Culture and Exhibited Culture in Ireland, 1973 to 1991, through the School of History and Humanities at Trinity College, Dublin. His major field of research is contemporary art history and its application to museum studies, focusing on the socio-cultural impact of exhibition making. So over to you, Fernando.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for Caroline and Kathryn first for inviting me today, and then Michael for the generous introduction. So good day. Thanks for joining us and the conversation today. So as Michael said, I'm Fernando and the Learning and Engagement Curator at the Douglas Hyde Gallery of Contemporary Art in Dublin, Ireland. The Douglas Hyde Gallery is an artist-centered organization which was established in 1978 by a unique partnership between the Arts Council of Ireland, which is the Irish government's development agency for the arts, and Trinity College Dublin, one of the leading universities in Ireland and worldwide. So we are very unique positioned to be supported by both bodies, and we are a space to see and learn about contemporary art, supporting artists and challenge conventions, whether it's through formal kind of approaches to art making or through their ideas as well. One thing that probably we'll mention later on when we talk through the questions, we see ourselves as facilitators rather than gatekeepers of their visions as well. It's that idea of facilitating and mediating the world rather than gatekeeping their artworks as well. Something that's kind of essential to our vision and our mission, or what we do, is that for us, art can help us to understand, question, and challenge the world around us. And that's a kind of fundamental principle, kind of informing the programming, whether it's the exhibition programming or the learning and engagement program that I designed. So it's that idea of that work can help us to, again, understand, challenge, questions the world around us as well. Just to kind of give you an idea of our recent projects, just to give you a sense of what we do. Let me change this. Let me see if I can change slides there. So I just wanted to show you a bit of what we do in terms of exhibitions or projects that we've been having. This project is happening now, actually. It's titled Freud, and it's by Amanda Coogan. And I love this image because it's part of an iteration of this project, which happens in Cork Summer Festival. And actually the performance happens at the Crawford Gallery with Michael Waldron's work. So I really particularly love this image because they're kind of multiple connections as well. And this is a very interesting project because Amanda is collaborating with various community groups with the Dublin Theatre of the Deaf, Cork Deaf Community Choir, and the Centre for Deaf Studies in Trinity College as well. And I suppose this project is quite interesting because they look about accessibility in a very kind of profound kind of way. Amanda and the group use Irish Sign Language as a choreographic language to explore the struggles of the Irish Deaf community as well. Another exhibition that we recently have is Dangerous to Go Alone, Take This by Bassam Isa Al-Saba, which was just this year as well. And it's very interesting project as well, looking at the idea of selfhood and queer possibility, an idea of gender as a kind of social construct. The last exhibition I want to talk to you about, I suppose, is kind of looking at the themes of race and identity. It's a project. It was a very interesting project and kind of ran last year, Family Line Zero's Recap. And it was a kind of multi-platform project as well. There's a Cork connection as well, because there was lots of billboard posters around the city during the period of the time as well. And this project is very interesting from the point of view which look at kind of embedded personal histories and cultural narratives from the point of view of Alice, which is mixed race background, Alice and Sierra Leone identity, and looking at family history and how we think about ourselves as well. So I just want to show you a couple of the examples of what we do as well. So when I was reflecting on the idea of curating activity, and I'm delighted that Michael gave such a precise, kind of wonderful definition of curating activism. And it's going back to that idea of how we kind of learn from the different projects that we have created ourselves. So it's that idea of whose world, that idea that I've mentioned there, like for us, use ours as a way to connect with the world around us. So, but whose world are we representing? Is it a white world? Is it like kind of upper class, highly educated world? So, which worlds? So, whose worlds are we representing on our exhibitions and projects as well? Sorry, just gonna move that there. And something that I had learned through the difference, and kind of this as institutions will be learning quite a lot, it's just called institutional bias. Just check yourself, think about, institutional create where you're at. Consultation, do your homework as well, but think about it quite ethical responsibilities. For us, the majority of the projects we see them as a co-design, co-developing, and co-produce. With all the different groups that we do, the artists, but also in terms of learning and engagement with our youth programs, the center point is that co-design and co-development, but also be very conscious of the power dynamics on that. Like, we're coming from kind of, very particular space. And again, something that I mentioned, curators, facilitator, mediator, rather than gatekeeper, is something that I've been kind of thinking quite a lot in that term. So, and for us, it's just put there outside the queue, but the kind of outreach to people as well, something that we have learned quite a lot as well. And probably can talk about this more in that. And something which is quite reflective, just maybe think about inclusivity versus tokenism and sustainability for relationships that you create with communities as well. As I said, when I'm thinking about cultural activism, I have more answers than questions. And I suppose two of the key questions that I want to put out there to everyone, and probably we can talk about, is, are we correcting activism, or are we creating justice and equality? And I suppose, as I said, it's very good that Michael gives that very specific kind of definition of curating activism in relation to that, what we're doing here. And something that I've just been thinking quite a lot recently as well, I was at a kind of museum conference call recently, and somebody within the audience questioned whether museums or cultural institutions should be neutral. I found that question quite interesting, because it doesn't matter how much you do, cultural institutions are never neutral. That's me for now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Fernando. And yes, I think we're going to be picking up on those questions and getting to the core of them, hopefully. I'll just move swiftly along and introduce our final panelist, and thank you for your patience waiting till last. So Kathryn Murano Santos is Senior Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Rochester Museum and Science Centre, where she has stewardship of 1.2 million objects. That's mind-boggling, held in trust for the public. Over 20 years as a museum professional and public anthropologist, she approaches museum interpretation, visitor engagement, and collections and data management through the dual lenses of community collaboration and decolonization. She's led on initiatives including repatriation to Native American nations and tribes, co-creation of exhibits and programs, and collections digitization. Her current work focuses on how museums can build relationships, repair harm, and broaden educational access to become more equitable and inclusive. So over to you, Kathryn.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today with everyone. I thought for my brief presentation that I would kind of spotlight a couple of exhibition projects that we've undertaken at the RMSC over time. and that I could show you how we've approached the curation of activism, highlighting some of the challenges we've faced as well as some of our lessons learned. So let me get this up here. So first, I wanted to highlight an exhibition called Flight to Freedom, Rochester's Underground Railroad. This exhibition opened in 2008, so quite a while ago, and it was designed to be a permanent exhibit at the RMSC. We've found that it's been really important to the community. So even after its kind of 15-year imagined tenure, it still lives on here. And I should say that the mission of the RMSC is to inspire a better future for all through curiosity, exploration, and participation in science, culture, and the natural world. So we cover a lot of ground here. We have a very interdisciplinary mission. And so that's an important part of all of the projects that we do in permanent exhibitions especially. And we do have a very broad audience that focuses on families visiting with children aged 5 to 15. So ensuring that our experiences are appropriate for multi-generational audiences is also one of the hallmarks of our exhibit experience, and something that we're always having to think about, of course, as we develop new projects. So for this project in particular, in kind of the early 2000s, we had done some audience studies to understand what the baseline was for people's prior knowledge of topics like the Underground Railroad, the era of enslavement. And we actually found that this learning was not really emphasized as part of people's formal educational background. So in order to present this topic with any kind of integrity, we needed to do a lot of education around the era of enslavement, and we needed to highlight just the basics of what the Underground Railroad even was. We actually had a lot of participants who thought at the time that there was literally an underground railway. So correcting misconceptions is a big part of what we knew we needed to do through this project. There were also some concerns for whitewashing as we went through in our audience studies, doing some of the kind of early background information to lay the groundwork for the exhibition. So we needed to tackle these topics in a way that really emphasized truth telling. And so we knew that right up front. So we did include a lot of community participation in the process of developing this exhibit. We wanted to make history come to life again in order to have that multi-generational appeal. So we focused the storytelling on the life and work of Rochester abolitionists, who of course include Frederick Douglass, but we also created some interactive experiences and tried to lean into multi-sensory experiences to appeal to a broad range of audiences. So what you're seeing on the left there is an example of an interactive where you can actually meld your own face with Frederick Douglass. And part of the messaging is how can you think about the challenges that abolitionists were facing in their own lives, making very difficult choices. So we were challenging visitors to make their own difficult choices if they were faced in these similar tough situations. So we had a lot of recreated environments that are a part of this, and we focused many of the stories on the own words and storytelling of the people who are featured therein. So in addition to Frederick Douglass, we highlight the stories of Austin Stewart, Thomas James, and Harriet Jacobs, who all were enslaved, took their freedom, spent a part of their life in freedom in Rochester, and it's really important that we have their autobiographies that have enabled us to tell some of their stories in their own words. So we also interpret literacy as an important means to resist oppression. Not all aspects of this exhibition, however, have aged well. So one of the things that we're thinking about currently is how we might reimagine parts of this experience to ensure that the role and experience of Black abolitionists is centered as much as possible throughout the entire exhibition design, and that we're aligning the experience with trauma-informed research and experiential design. So then in 2017, so nearly a decade later, we developed the exhibition Take It Down, Organizing Against Racism. This is actually a very small exhibit. It's about a 9-foot carousel panel. And this object was actually the object of controversy in our community for about a year leading up to this. And for 8 months, local activists struggled to get this racist carousel panel removed. The carousel panel was on a landmark carousel in our own community for 111 years by the time that it was taken down. And it's a long story about how this all came to light in the wake of the national take it down movements that were going on, focusing a lot of times on Confederate imagery. But this came to light and activists in our community activated around it. And as I said, took 8 months to finally get this panel to be removed from the carousel. There was a preservation board hearing at which it finally was voted on to come down. And during that time, the RMSC participated in the process of writing the application to get it removed. So the idea was that the panel would go into the stewardship of the RMSC as part of not its owned collection, but kind of a permanent loan from the city of Rochester. And it was at that meeting that I heard for the first time that many of the Black activists in Rochester's community who participated in this process to get the carousel panel removed did not want the panel to come to the RMSC for its care and interpretation, fearing that the RMSC would whitewash this story and not really tell the whole unvarnished truth about the history of racism in our own community and nationally that enabled a panel like this to be on display in a public place for 111 years. So it was in that moment that I realized we really needed a new model for collaboration, one that I call authentic community collaboration. And we did create a new model of partnership, working hand in hand with members of the community, the activists who had struggled to get this panel removed, to ensure authentic voice in the storytelling, shared authority, and we ended up making all of our decisions based on consensus. This was a really powerful process. It also caused us to really interrogate ourselves and self-examine how we might, as an organization, be upholding institutional racism and really understand more about how to combat that both institutionally and then in our own professional lives. So the exhibition is structured almost as an FAQ. How can racism hide in plain sight? The struggle of the activists to get it removed, and that what we can each do to combat racism in our own lives. This partnership has actually evolved into a robust program partnership as well. So we continue having community conversations around issues of race and racism, as well as anti-racist education. And this has taken many different forms over time. What you see on the right-hand side is one of the activists who participated in the process, Howard Eagle, who is working with a group of school students to deliver this programming at the RMSC. Then we really took this model of community curation to scale in the Changemakers Rochester Women Who Changed the World, which opened in 2020 as a commemoration of the centennial of national women's suffrage in the United States. So we really set out to develop this exhibition highlighting regional women who have impacted the world. And in order to ensure diverse and equitable representation in the stories we were telling, we really knew that we had to have an equitable process. We had to have diverse representation among the folks who were creating the exhibition. So we really stepped into the role more as facilitator and convener of what ended up being a group of 11 partner organizations, more than 50 community curators, 3 DEI consultants, and others to create this amazing 8,000 square foot exhibition. Unfortunately, it was only a temporary offering, but we did learn a ton of lessons in equity that we have been able to bring forward into the future and to build a lot of new relationships. What you're seeing in the pictures here, we've also leaned into participatory experiences through this exhibit offering. So folks were invited to write down things that were barriers in their own lives and then rip them up and put them into a glass bottle that became almost like a community art project. On the right-hand side, one of the other things we grappled with as we were creating this exhibit was the question of how to curate activism in real time. One of the really important things that was going on, certainly in the United States as a whole, but also specifically in Rochester, New York, there was very widespread protests different Black Lives Matter groups mobilized in the time after the death of Daniel Prude at the hands of police in Rochester. And Reverend Myra Brown ended up being one of the change makers that we featured in this exhibition. You see her there standing in front of police, really putting her body in between police and protesters to protect them. So this question about how to curate activism in real time became very important. We knew that to not interpret history as it's unfolding now would be a mistake, a very important missed opportunity. So we wanted to be sure to do that, but we also knew that we probably were not the people to tell those stories. So we engaged one of our community curators, Rachel de Guzman, who guest curated a specific changing segment within the exhibition that you see on the left-hand side there called Change Now. And so that focused on the national Black Lives Matter movement and the local movement in the words of women doing that organizing. So it was a very powerful opportunity and one of the ways that we worked through that question. So my last example is the 2022 exhibition, Wonders of Water. And this exhibition includes the work of local activists and organizers, which has really become a consistent thread, I would say, in most of the new exhibition projects that we're doing. And this exhibit as a whole explores the significance of the waters of Western New York as being so significant as natural forces and sources of life. So we wanted to make sure that we're emphasizing the personal and cultural connections that we all have with these waters, including our shared responsibility for their preservation. So there's an area of the exhibition that focuses on environmental justice activism, and it features the work of activists, including Tanya Noel Stevens, who you see pictured on the left there, and Seneca water walker Maria Maybe. And guests are also invited to create their own public service announcement that Tanya is presenting as an opportunity for participation about water stewardship. And it's a green screen experience. So that's been really popular, especially with kind of the middle school aged group. So in summary and closing, I just wanted to say that certainly our struggle to figure out how best to curate activism is ongoing. A couple of the specific issues we're grappling with right now include how to practice truth-telling without causing additional trauma to communities that have already been traumatized so much. And if we can't be truly neutral, as some of our other panelists pointed out, what is our role in social justice? Also, communities are not monolithic, so how can we meet everyone where they are and make space for different experiences and needs? And finally, how can we institutionalize the partnerships that we're creating, the relationships that we're building, rather than having those live with specific individuals at the institution? So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. And thank you to all of our panelists. You've really shared quite powerful and quite diverse examples from your own curatorial practices, and I think maybe some of our audience members will want to ask you questions specifically related to some of those. But before that, let's jump into some questions. Please feel free to, whoever wants to answer or not, just go for it. So I want to ask something that's quite general before we get into it. What does activism represent or look like to you? Because Fernando, you mentioned, are we curating activism, or are we curating equality and social justice? And I like that idea of breaking down what is activism and what are basically the basics that we need to be responding to in institutions and in civic spaces.
I don't know. I suppose it's my bilingual kind of mind. I look at activism as a kind of very politically charged kind of word. Is that idea of activism as a political act, which they are. But I've been thinking quite a lot, and that's one of the questions. I don't have the answer for it. Those two bits on my presentation were the kind of questions that I still have in my mind. And this book comes from that idea as a cultural institutions, what is our duty? Are we representing? Is that idea, whose stories are we telling? Who are we representing? So it's that idea of equality, because I suppose, unfortunately, the world is unjust and unequal. So as a cultural institutions then try to, serve the society that they are part of, I suppose rather than just kind of thinking about as a kind of radical act of activism, and I suppose my own, as I said, interpretation of the idea of activism, it shouldn't be that radical. It should be what must happen, really, in a kind of way. It's kind of, we should all strive for that as well. And again, as I mentioned, and probably Kathryn touched upon it, that idea of the kind of institutions being neutral. How can we, I don't think institutions, as I said, are neutral as well. But how can we kind of, be equal or just as well at the same time? So I don't know if I answer your question. Is more kind of expanding your question again, I guess.
No, I think that's great. And I think maybe we'll end up with more questions than answers this, in this panel. But I think it's a space, a discursive space where, we probably won't have the last word. But it's trying to kind of tease out these ideas. I think of, the institution itself. I come from an institution that used to be a school of art, is now a national art gallery. It has a collection that was assembled over 2 centuries. It reflects the phases of development of the society that of the time. So it's eccentric in some ways, but also it's colonial and imperial, because even the act of collecting seems like a sort of a colonial act, a repository of all knowledge. So I suppose that will bring me to another question, unless someone wants to jump in about activism more generally. But I'm going to kind of conflate some of the prepared questions and just think about, how do we address that sort of implicit bias? And I know some of you have already touched on it, but how do you address it? What are the strategies around countering bias, recognizing it, and how do we keep ourselves on our toes? I'm not answering that one. It's over to you.
I think, Michael, it's a great question. It's involving people who need to be involved in whatever is, being curated, if they are around and available still, and if not, most of the time there are connections, personal connections. And the other piece for the curation for the digital project is very much based on my own personal reaction to this work of art that was curated by, people who were academics, but also activists who got it there. And, including help from Kristen, which is amazing, to get that statue where it is now, and is one of the very few of Douglass as a young man, which is very significant, being so close to where he was enslaved as when he was born, but then his trips to Ireland and Britain that influenced his greater humanity and thought and ability to communicate. And communication is also a really important piece of activism, I think.
For sure, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that idea of, how do we communicate, but also, who are we communicating with and to in that exchange?
Yeah, and some of the ideas that we've been exploring include, how do we drop the museum voice out altogether? So can we, collaborate with partners? Can we include multiple perspectives, but from communities of origin and interest in telling their own stories through authentic voice. And then also providing guests and visitors the opportunity to weigh in on issues, to grapple with the same kinds of ideas, to present their perspectives through various participatory experiences, which you saw coming out in some of the content that I had presented from various exhibit projects. And in that way, the museum is, again, functioning as this kind of connector, convener for a conversation, but is not as present as one of the discussants. Now, of course, any act of curation is an act of choosing certain things and not choosing others. So again, even the power dynamics behind who is making those choices is very important in the process.
I think
Great.
the other thing I would just add is that, we bring implicit bias as curators, and we want to work sort of against that. But our visitors, those who walk through our doors, they also bring their own biases. So how do we, when we're presenting information, think about how it's going to be received, and do that in a way that is welcoming and inviting and helps kind of negate any possible sense of like, this story is not for me, for whatever reason that someone might feel that way, and thinking about what biases just the public is bringing into our spaces as well.
Can I add something to that as well? I mean, particularly we've been doing lots of work in the gallery, that idea of creating multiple entry points. But I suppose one of the ideas is empowering the audience to make their own choices about how they want to engage with the work as well. I mean, trying to get the curatorial voice out of the equation, but creating kind of, again, different ways of interpreting things, as kind of Kathryn said, different ways of experiencing the exhibit. So it's that idea of, like, in a way, empowering the audience as well to make their own choices. I suppose you're telling a story, because I suppose curating is selecting, but curating is also storytelling. So you're telling stories. So that give the people the tools to empower themselves to make the choices about how much, how little, how long, to connect with the work as well. And so I suppose for us as curators, again, that idea, curator, mediator, facilitator, than I was mentioning, rather than the gatekeeper, like a kind of keeping the objects close. I think it's important on that kind of way as well. So.
Yeah, excellent. Like my mind is sort of spinning now, because I'm really getting into the thought myself of, I mean, in curated spaces, whether they may be outdoors or indoors, physical or online, the question of mediation obviously is there. And how do you create something that is engaging and mediated, but unbiased, balanced, but not unwieldy? It's quite a lot. And then I work in a specifically visual arts institution. So how do you I don't have an answer, but how do you mitigate for maybe an artist's position on something that may not be unbiased, and you need to allow the artist to be authentic without necessarily being offensive, but then at the same time, risk is really important, and our encounters with that can be challenging. You can't necessarily sanitize something or whitewash or do any number of things, but it's there's very rich questions in there. I think we don't have a whole lot of time though, and I'm conscious that there may be burning questions from our audience members. So maybe at this point we might have a look to see if there are any questions from you guys out there. I don't see anything in the chat yet, but maybe if someone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question or put up your hand, maybe Kristen and Caroline can help as well. I have some more questions, but I don't want to take up all the airspace either. So anyone want to take a leap?
Can I ask you a question, Michael?
Oh yeah, Fernando,
Yes,
please ask us questions.
Just following what you say, how you deal with how will you deal with, for example, working with an artist that has an unbiased point of view? And I suppose have you thought about it? Or I don't know if we can get, I don't know, everybody else to contribute to that idea. Do you have a particular point of view on that?
It's interesting because this kind of has arisen, and it always arises in a, when you have an exhibition, there will be engagement, hopefully, and public response. But a very interesting kind of case study right now is that we have an exhibition that actually closes this weekend, and it's called Persistent Illusion. And it's by the contemporary artist Rita Duffy. And her background is that she grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, where Douglass Week will be hosted next year. And, that is quite a sectarian society that she grew up in, where there was a very particular divide. And so that's part of her formation, and she addresses that in her work. She addresses both sides of a conflict. But what's really interesting is that her new work addresses the world in chaos, perhaps, and she has kind of isolated, a polarizing figure as an example, and this would be Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And that's a very particular Northern Irish or Irish view across the Atlantic at a particular political and social moment. And we had some American visitors who acknowledged that they weren't necessarily Trump supporters, but they recoiled somewhat at America being used as the example. And I thought that very interesting, because they said, what about Putin? Or what about, so we always have, our own position. And when we encounter that provocation given, put forward by an artist, it is that, our own response is as telling as maybe how it's curated. So I don't have an answer, but I just thought that was a very interesting example of, even in an international context, what might be acceptable discourse in one place may not be in another, or the sands shift underfoot somewhat. So I'm going to jump into another question because I see one. If we have time, this is Joe. Can I ask, how can activists who are not artists approach museum and galleries with an idea to explore? So can the activist who isn't an artist, who isn't a curator necessarily, but someone who is an activist with an idea, does anyone have experience of that? Or how would you respond if an activist came to you?
Well, in our Take It Down Organizing Against Racism exhibition, that's essentially how that project took form. So it was the community activists who had no background in curation or, were not artists themselves, really developed the content and vision for that exhibition. So in that case, the museum staff shifted into those roles of facilitator, convener. We brought forward the technical expertise and kind of created a process that those activists could work within to develop their idea into an exhibit. So that's kind of what we did in that context. Now, we knew it was already a project that we would participate in. So the institution had already determined that it was a project that would move forward in some form or fashion. But the way that manifested was unusual and was our first foray into community curation as a model.
It's so interesting as a model, because as institutions or curators or people who, when you're engaging with your audiences and communities, taking not necessarily the back seat, but making sure that you offer the support, but actually that those voices are at the forefront is, I think, is really exciting. And it's, I hope, where museums are going, or institutions more generally. I'm just wondering, are there any other questions from anyone
Michael.
out there?
I saw one. Yeah, there's Gina Kelly. She has raised her hand, so please unmute yourself. And I have another one that was sent to me, so I'll send it. I'll say that in a minute. But Gina, you go first.
Hi, how are you? I'm just really interested in the idea of trust within our museums. I think we have established. I mean, I think there was a report about 2 years ago that came out from the AAM and the American Alliance of Museums that spoke about trust in our institutions, and we tend to kind of use that phrase a lot as trusted institutions, but not sometimes think about that. Where it essentially kind of pinpointed that as those who trusted most in museums, or those who viewed museums as trusted institutions, was directly correlated to how little they saw them as having a bias or taking a stance on things. To me, a museum today takes a stance. I think we take it sometimes with a capital A or sometimes with a very small a, in the same way that we talk about politics with a capital P or a small p. I think we influence. So I'm just wondering where the panel sees that museums can maybe mesh those two things together. I suppose, thinking myself, I probably have some preconceived ideas around how activism can work in a museum, sometimes with a small a or a small p, because I think activism and politics kind of are correlated, and we are in a society where politicization of certain things that to me would be very factual become very highly divisive subjects. So I'm just thinking what the panel thinks about how you approach that while maintaining how you approach these values that we uphold while also maintaining that trust with your audience.
Great question.
Is that a bit vague?
It's juicy is what it is. Like, trust is so, I mean, we do speak about it, right? But what does it really mean, and how does it manifest, right? I don't know, do any of you have a specific response to that?
It's a juicy question, indeed. And I suppose it's just, I mean, I'm familiar with the report that you mentioned, Gina. And I have some questions about that report anyway, but we can talk about it later anyway. But I suppose the idea of trust, I suppose is a gateway, is that idea of so your audience trusts you, but I suppose it's down to transparency of what you're doing as well, and the decision making involved into that idea of the activism or some particular ideas and won't appeal to everyone. I suppose is transparency. I think is the bridge, just to be very clear about what you're doing and how you're doing it, in what context. And I suppose that would be kind of what I see it really, because I was kind of thinking about Michael's Rita Duffy's example, that idea of having a very particular kind of point of view. If you contextualize and are transparent about what you're making, what decisions are making, I suppose that trust can be maintained, even if people are not agreeing with what you may say. I suppose is why you kind of taking a particular stand. I'm not sure if I answered, Gina. I suppose it's just, for me, I've been thinking about that question quite a lot too. And for me, transparency is the bridge between both the trust and whatever message you're gonna get across anyway.
I think that's great. And I think it's something that probably we do think about on some level all the time, but it's, for me, it comes back, yes, to transparency, but to care. Care of the artist or the artifact, care of how you present that, but also care of those who encounter it. And you can never maybe fully anticipate everything. You can have your checklist beforehand to go, okay, how about if I take it from this perspective? How can someone maybe experience it this way? Unless I think you have that sort of almost grassroots input all of the time in your decision making. I think just leading with that sense of care, and if you get something wrong, put your hand up and say, we got it wrong. We got it wrong. We hear you. And it's not about cancel culture or anything like that, but it's we hear you, we understand, we'll build that in. That would be my little take on it. Anyone else want to respond to that? Or Gina, do you have any other ideas regarding it?
No, I think there's a couple of things there that you picked up on, and I think you've mentioned before in terms of both being very transparent. I mean, you have in Ireland, we have a number of museums that are openly activist and openly political. I'm thinking, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of, the Museum of Free Dairy. We all know when you go into the Museum of Free Dairy what you're probably going to encounter. It is a particular perspective. And then you might go into the Orange Order Museum, the Siege Museum, or something like that, and see a different perspective. So I think that transparency is really crucial. But also, somebody was talking earlier about, that kind of co-participate. I think it was you, Kathryn, about that or that heavily involved co-production process. And I'm thinking now of the Museum of Homelessness in the UK, which is essentially run and developed by activists, people who are experienced homelessness themselves. And by the way, they actually don't define themselves as activists. They just say that they're speaking to values and common sense, which I quite like. But I think there's elements there that come in, but I do think we need to maybe be careful sometimes about how we approach it, in terms of we are in a very privileged position, and I think we sometimes roll out words or kind of cliches. Museums are neutral, museums are not neutral. We've kind of moved between those two phrases within the last 30 years. And just maybe think a lot about when we say these things, what do they actually mean? And what do we mean when we say this? Just be maybe more reflective, I suppose.
Very much so. And I think, as you say, it depends on the position of the institution itself, whether it is privately funded, publicly funded. Is there an arm's lengthness to it in terms of governance? I think I can think of a few museums where they can't do certain things because of their governance, their funding, or whatever. So it's a very interesting area to, I think, get into. I'm conscious that we're already 11 minutes over time.
That's okay, Michael. We have one more question, and I see that Kathryn also wanted to say something. I think if you guys have to bounce, please do. This will be on YouTube, but I have one burning question here from someone in the audience, and I saw that Kathryn had unmuted herself as well to probably respond to that.
I'll keep it very brief. I agree with what everybody said in response to Gina's question. I would just add that I think demystifying where the facts are coming from is another part of the answer to this question. So, how do we know what the information that we're presenting? Is it from someone's lived experience? Is it, from this particular document? Is it from this historic object that we are making that point, that leap, that interpretive suggestion? So I think demystifying where the information is coming from and how we are asserting the things that we are asserting is an important piece of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think even just our vocabulary around, in some cases, an object. I recently was at a workshop, and the idea of an object that has a creator that is unknown, an unnamed person, that's not that person's fault necessarily. And the fact that it is unrecorded is probably our fault. And so even just the language around something being unknown or an anonymous, well, it really isn't necessarily. It's just that we haven't taken the time to record it, or we can't record the name of an individual for various reasons. So just that even our vocabulary and our language, depending on who we are hoping to address or connect with. Okay, I think there's one other question, Caroline.
Yeah, I think the idea is here kind of sort of looking toward the future, and I think this kind of goes back maybe to what Lily had said about the educational resources, and also Teresa in the educational setting of the University of Maryland. And so perhaps we can hear from Lily and Teresa and others, of course, please chime in. But the question was that as we look to the future, what do you envision as the key priorities and opportunities for museums and galleries in their ongoing efforts to fight racism and promote education about social issues? And how do you see their role evolving in the ongoing conversation about social justice and equity? What changes do you anticipate in the years ahead? So maybe, we have Lily at the New York Historical Society and then the University of Maryland. So maybe you guys want to chime in, but please, everyone, feel free. So kind of what do we see when we look to the future? What changes are ahead? What do you think? What do you anticipate?
That is a really big question. I think it's a really good question. I think, one of the things that COVID has enabled and sort of forced everyone into is more kind of virtual kinds of presentations, more collapsing of distance. And so, historically, our main bread and butter audience for education has been New York City school teachers in classrooms, because they could come to the museum, they could visit it, our educators could go out to them. And what we've seen, and actually has been really true of Composite Nation in particular, is that teachers across the nation, possibly across the world, are interested in this kind of content and exploring these themes that are very resonant today, things that happened, 150 plus years ago. And so I think that we are finding ways to get our resources out to more people. And that's what I hope to see as museums can kind of leverage the sort of resources, the expertise, whether it's collaboration with scholars or community members, however that might be, to kind of reach a broader audience, in particular those who may not be able to come to a museum for whatever reason that might be. And so I see that as being a big direction. And just thinking about sort of what can our resources offer beyond maybe the specific historical moment that they are looking at for thinking about civic participation or democracy, or these kind of bigger things that people today, students, adults, are grappling with.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And I think I from the beginning, when this was just a final project, thought in my head about an outdoor, totally accessible museum for spotlighting this statue and square. And access has always been really, on my mind. And the digital opportunities, like you were talking about, more people now sort of get and can access digitally, and encouraging libraries self-education in addition to any other education, having those resources. I also wanted to just say that it's a little different, for what I'm doing than an actual museum, but the challenge from the grant that I received to continue building and working with this project challenged non-Black applicants to examine the topic from our own perspective with introspection and a critical eye. So along with collaboration, I see that as a really important way to move forward. And like you said, Michael, understanding we're humans, and even if we make mistakes, we just say it and collaborate and communicate and examine and interpret, it from our own perspective and make that clear.
Super, thank you so much. I think we could go on and on and on, but I don't think we have time because you have been all so generous with your time, and everyone attending. I know some have had to leave a little bit earlier, but I would just like to thank obviously Caroline and Kristen for organizing this event, and also continuing to have the fire burning for it so that we could hold it at a postponed date, but also to our panelists, to Kathryn, Lily, Teresa, and Fernando. You've shared so many insights, and I think we could probably spend more than this little portion of time teasing out even just one of these questions that we've been responding to. So hopefully it's an appetizer, so to speak, for further discussion and further engagement. And I, for one, am thrilled to have been a fly on the wall here, because I think I've learned so much, and my mind is racing on how my own practice can shift from what you shared. So I might hand back to Caroline and Kristen now, unless anyone else wants to say anything.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Fernando, Kathryn, Lily, Teresa, and also Kristen, of course. Thank you, everyone in the audience. It's a really great discussion. I think, like you said, Michael, would like to echo that. Many important questions posed, more questions posed, actually, and many critical aspects that we discussed tonight. And I wish we had a lot more time, but there will be Douglass Week 2024, and we will continue this discussion and this conversation. And I hope that we will all carry some of what we discussed tonight with us when we engage with our communities, and that we reflect and keep this with us and as we go, in our everyday, but also in our professional and our personal lives. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers, Michael as a moderator and a great host of the event. Really appreciate you all taking the time. Thank you for the audience participation. It is about the participation. It's about this platform for people to come together and have a conversation. And we look forward to continuing that. As I said, this will be on YouTube, so people can watch it after this event is over. And we look forward to the next Curating Activism, hopefully in April 2024. And thank you so much, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are. And thank you so much, and we'll talk to you very soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.